Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its deep resonance cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. Elena stood frozen by the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, watching the empty street where moments before, Marcus had walked away without looking back. The words he'd whispered just hours earlier still hung in the air like mourning. Missed. I love you, Elena. I've never loved anyone the way I love you. That love, she was learning, sometimes wore the mask of goodbye. 3 months earlier, Elena had been a woman who believed in schedules, in predictability, in the comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. At 32, she had built her life like a carefully tended garden, orderly, beautiful, and completely under her control. Her bookshop, Pages and Prose, nestled between a vintage cafe and a flower shop on Maple Street, was her sanctuary. Between the familiar scent of old books and the gentle rustling of turning pages, she had found peace. That peace shattered the moment Marcus walked through her door. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when the bell above her entrance chimed, and she looked up from cataloguing new arrivals to see him standing there, tall, with dark hair that caught the amber light filtering through her windows, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He seemed to fill the entire space with his presence. He wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested depths she couldn't quite fathom. I'm looking for something, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. Something that might help me understand this place. Elena set down her pen, suddenly aware of how her heart had begun to race. What kind of place are you trying to understand? He smiled then, a slow, careful expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. A place where people stay, where they put down roots and build lives that last. There was something in his tone, a longing wrapped in resignation, that made her chest tighten. Are you new to town? Very new. He moved closer to the counter, and she caught the faint scent of cedar and something she couldn't identify, something that reminded her of distant places and untold stories. I'm Marcus, Elena. She extended her hand, and when he took it, she felt a shock of recognition, as if she'd been waiting for this moment without realizing it. His fingers were warm, slightly rough, and he held her hand a fraction longer than necessary. Elena, he repeated, and her name sounded different in his voice, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. Can you recommend something? Something about belonging? She found herself walking from behind the counter, drawn by an impulse she didn't understand. What kind of belonging? To a place, to people, to yourself. All of it, I suppose. His eyes followed her movements as she led him to the fiction section. I've been traveling for so long, I'm not sure I remember what it feels like to be still. There was something about the way he said it that made her want to reach out, to touch his arm, to offer comfort. Instead, she pulled a book from the shelf. This one, she said, handing him a worn copy of The Light We Lost. It's about love and choice and the weight of decisions we make. He took the book, his fingers brushing hers again. And you think it will help me understand belonging? I think it will help you understand that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us back to ourselves. Something shifted in his expression then, a vulnerability that made her breath catch. Have you taken that journey? I thought I had. The words surprised her with their honesty. Until today, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. And now? She looked at him, this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all, and felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. Now I'm not so sure. He bought the book, and as she rang up his purchase, he asked, Would you like to have coffee sometime? I'd like to hear more about your journey. Elena had said yes without hesitation, surprising herself. She wasn't the type to accept invitations from mysterious strangers, but something about Marcus made her want to be braver, to step outside the safe boundaries she'd drawn around her life. Their first coffee date stretched into dinner, and dinner into a long walk through the quiet streets of their small town. Marcus was unlike anyone she'd ever met, well-traveled, intelligent, with stories that painted pictures of places she'd only read about. He'd lived in Prague, taught English in small villages in Thailand, spent months in Argentina learning to make wine. His life was a collection of experiences, each one carefully gathered and held like precious stones. Don't you ever want to settle down? She asked as they paused beneath a streetlight, autumn leaves swirling around their feet. I used to think settling was the same as giving up, he said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. But lately, I've been wondering if it might be more like coming home. The way he looked at her when he said it made her heart skip. And what changed your mind? I met someone who makes me want to stay in one place long enough to see what we could build together. Their first kiss happened 3 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday evening when he'd come to help her move inventory. They'd been laughing about something, she couldn't even remember what, when suddenly the laughter died, and they were looking at each other with an intensity that made the air between them electric. When he cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers, it felt like coming alive for the first time. I should tell you, he whispered against her mouth. I'm falling in love with you. Good, she whispered back, because I'm falling too. The next 2 months passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Marcus would appear at her shop during quiet afternoon hours, bringing her coffee and pastries from the cafe next door. They'd talk about books, about dreams, about the kind of future they wanted to build. He was slowly furnishing a small apartment above the antique store down the street, and sometimes Elena would find herself imagining what it would be like to share that space with him. He was careful with her heart, never pushing, never demanding more than she was ready to give. But there were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, as if he were memorizing her face, storing it away for safekeeping. What are you thinking? She asked one evening as they lay on her couch, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Just that I never thought I'd find this, he said, his fingers running through her hair. I never thought I'd find someone who would make me want to change everything. What would you change? He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Finally, he said, I'd learned to trust that good things can last. I'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was something in his voice that made her lift her head to look at him. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? But he just kissed her forehead and pulled her closer. Nothing that matters. Not anymore. Their relationship deepened as winter approached. They spent Thanksgiving together, just the two of them, cooking in her small kitchen and talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about his childhood in a small town she'd never heard of, about parents who'd died when he was young, about a sister he'd lost touch with years ago. I've been running from family for so long, he said, helping her dry dishes. I forgot what it felt like to want to create one. Is that what you want? Elena asked, her heart racing. To create a family. He set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. With you? Yes. Elena, I want everything with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to grow old with you and argue about what to watch on television and take vacations to places neither of us has ever been. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope into the connection between them. I want that too, she whispered. I want all of it. December brought the first snow, and with it, a subtle change in Marcus. He became more intense, more focused. as if he were trying to squeeze every moment of happiness from their time together. He brought her small gifts, a vintage compass, a leather journal, a silver locket that had belonged to his grandmother. "Why do these feel like goodbye presents?" she asked one evening, holding the locket in her palm. "They're not goodbye presents," he said, but something in his eyes made her chest tighten. "They're promises. Promises that no matter what happens, you'll know how much you mean to me." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you, Elena. I need you to know that. I need you to believe it, no matter what." "I do believe it," she said, but fear was beginning to creep up her spine like cold fingers. "But why does it feel like you're trying to say goodbye?" "Because I am," he said quietly, and her world tilted. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face for answers. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I love you too much to destroy you. I mean, I love you too much to let you get hurt because of me." "That doesn't make sense." "Marcus, if you love me, I do love you. That's why I have to go." The words hung between them like a chasm. Elena felt her heart begin to break, piece by piece, as she realized he was serious. "Go where? For how long?" "I can't tell you that." "Can't or won't? Both." His voice was rough with emotion. "Elena, please. You have to trust me. There are things about my life, about my past, that I can't change. Things that make it impossible for me to stay." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "What things? What could possibly be so terrible that you'd throw away what we have?" "I can't tell you that either." "Then how am I supposed to trust you? How am I supposed to believe that this is about protecting me, and not about you getting scared and running away?" Pain flashed across his features. "Because you know me. Because you know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." "Then, don't do it." She reached for him, but he stepped away. "Marcus, we can face whatever this is together. That's what people who love each other do." "Not this time." He moved toward the door, and panic rose in her throat. "Elena, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll remember that I love you. Promise me that when you think about us, you'll remember the good parts, not this." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I can't promise that. I can't promise to just forget that you walked away from something beautiful, because you were too afraid to fight for it." "I'm not afraid of fighting for it," he said, his hand on the doorknob. "I'm afraid of what that fight might cost you." "Shouldn't that be my choice?" "Not this time." He looked at her one last time, and she saw her own heartbreak reflected in his eyes. "I love you, Elena. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." And then he was gone, leaving her standing in her living room, surrounded by the ghosts of all the futures they'd planned together. That had been 3 hours ago. Now Elena stood by her window, watching the snowfall in the golden circles of the streetlights, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The rational part of her mind insisted that Marcus had shown his true colors, that he was just another man who made promises he couldn't keep. But her heart knew better. Her heart knew that whatever had driven him away, it wasn't lack of love. She thought about the way he'd held her, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, the way he'd looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. You don't fake that kind of devotion. You don't fake the way his voice had broken when he'd said goodbye. The clock chimed 12:30, and Elena made a decision. She wouldn't let him disappear without answers. She grabbed her coat and boots, and within minutes, she was running through the snow-covered streets toward his apartment. The antique store was dark, but she could see a light in the window of his apartment above. She pounded on the door, calling his name, but there was no answer. Mrs. Chun from the flower shop next door poked her head out. Elena? What are you doing out here so late? I need to see Marcus. It's important. Mrs. Chun's expression grew concerned. Honey, he left about an hour ago. Had a suitcase and everything. Said he was catching a late flight. Eleanor's heart sank. Did he say where he was going? No, but he looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. Are you okay? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She walked home through the snow, each step feeling heavier than the last. Back in her apartment, she sat on her couch and cried until there were no tears left. The next few days passed in a haze of grief and confusion. Elena tried to resume her normal routine, but everything reminded her of Marcus. The coffee shop where they'd had their first date, the park where they'd walked on Sunday mornings, the books on her shelves that he'd recommended. She found herself looking up every time the bell above her door chimed, hoping against hope that he'd walk through it with an explanation and an apology. A week after he'd left, Elena was closing up the shop when she noticed an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Her name was written on it in Marcus's careful handwriting, and her hands shook as she opened it. Elena, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. I know my leaving doesn't make sense, and I know I hurt you in ways I swore I never would. But I need you to know that everything I told you was true. I do love you. I love you so much that I'd rather live with the pain of being without you than risk putting you in danger. I can't tell you everything, not yet, but I can tell you this. My past caught up with me. There are people looking for me, people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. I've been running from them for years, and I thought I'd finally found a place where I could stop running. I thought I'd found a life worth the risk. But then, I realized that loving you meant protecting you, even from myself. Especially from myself. I don't know if our paths will cross again, but I want you to know that the time we spent together was the happiest of my life. You made me believe in love, in home, in the possibility of a future worth building. Even if I can't have that future with you, I'm grateful that you showed me it exists. Be happy. Elena, find someone who can give you all the things I can't. Find someone who can stay. All my love, Marcus P.S. I've left something for you in our favorite spot in the park. It's not much, but I hope it helps you remember the good parts. Elena read the letter 3 times before she could process what it meant. Marcus hadn't left because he didn't love her. He'd left because he did love her, and he believed he was protecting her from something dangerous. The rational part of her mind wanted to be angry about his high-handed decision to make that choice for her, that the part of her that loved him understood. If their positions had been reversed, wouldn't she have done the same thing? She grabbed her coat and walked to the park, snow crunching under her boots. Their favorite spot was a bench overlooking the pond, where they'd spent countless hours talking about their dreams. Tied to the bench with a red ribbon was a small package. Inside was a first edition of Jane Eyre, the book that had sparked their first real conversation about love and sacrifice. On the title page, Marcus had written, "For Elena, who taught me that love isn't about possession. It's about treasuring something beautiful enough to set it free. I hope someday I'll be worthy of treasuring you the way you deserve." Emily clutched the book to her chest and cried. But this time, her tears weren't just for what she'd lost. They were for what she'd found, too. Marcus had given her a love so deep and true that he'd sacrificed his own happiness to protect her. That kind of love didn't come along often, and even though it had ended, she was grateful to have experienced it. Winter turned to spring, and Elena slowly began to heal. She didn't date anyone else. She wasn't ready for that yet, but she started to find joy in small things again. She volunteered at the local literacy center, expanded her bookshop's community programming, and even started writing again. Something she hadn't done since college. 6 months after Marcus left, Elena was working late in the shop when she heard a familiar voice say, "I'm looking for something." She looked up, and there he was, standing in her doorway like a ghost made flesh. He looked thinner, more worn, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had captured her heart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "What are you looking for?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness," he said, "and maybe got a second chance." Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Are you free to stay this time?" "I am." He stepped closer, and she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of whatever he'd been carrying. "It's over, Elena. Whatever was chasing me, it's over. I'm free to stay, free to love you the way you deserve to be loved." "And what way is that? Completely, honestly, forever?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know I hurt you. I know I made choices that weren't mine to make. But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days making up for the time we lost." Elena stared at the ring box, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to run. To him, to throw her arms around him and pretend the last 6 months had never happened. But another part of her needed to know that he wouldn't disappear again the moment things got complicated. "How do I know you won't leave again?" she asked. "Because I've learned a difference between protecting someone and abandoning them," he said. "Because I've learned that love isn't about making decisions for someone else. It's about making decisions together. Because I've learned that running away from love isn't noble. It's cowardly." He opened the box, revealing a simple solitaire that caught the light and threw rainbows across the shop walls. "I can't promise that our life will be easy, Elena. I can't promise that there won't be challenges or complications. But I can promise that I will never leave you again. I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together." Elena looked at the ring, then at Marcus, then back at the ring. "What if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision, and I'll find a way to live with it. But I'll also wait for as long as it takes for you to believe that I'm worth the risk. And if I say yes, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." Elena thought about all the nights she'd lain awake missing him, all the mornings she'd woken up reaching for someone who wasn't there. She thought about the letter he'd left, the book he'd given her, the way he'd looked at her like she was his. A whole world. She thought about the kind of love that sacrificed itself for the beloved, and the kind of love that fought for a future together. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you. But on one condition." "Anything. No more secrets. No more making decisions for me. If we're going to do this, we do it as partners, as equals. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "I promise you everything." As he kissed her, Elena felt the pieces of her heart that had been scattered 6 months ago suddenly click back into place. This wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd watched him walk away at midnight. This was something better, a beginning built on truth, on trust, on the kind of love that could survive anything. Outside, snow began to fall again, but Elena barely noticed. She was too busy kissing the man who'd said he loved her, then vanished at midnight, then returned to love her forever. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that teach us that love isn't about never saying goodbye. It's about finding your way back to each other, no matter how far you've traveled or how long you've been apart. Grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, but this time, Elena wasn't watching through the window as love walked away. This time, she was in Marcus's arms, planning a future that would last far beyond any single moment in time. Love, she had learned, wasn't about perfect timing or perfect circumstances. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, someone Worth coming home to. Someone worth choosing again and again, no matter what the world threw at you. And as Marcus held her close and whispered promises of forever against her hair, Elena knew that their story was just beginning.